how is it that you came to Barry as a student? What brought you here? Why Barry? Why did you choose Barry?
Okay. I went to public school my whole life. Through
By the way, you're the first sister that has told me that.
Really?
Everyone went to Catholic school. Okay,
Okay.
but start all over again.
All right. I went to public school. I was raised in New York on Long Island, and my parents used to vacation in Miami, and sometimes we came with them. Sometimes we stayed with our grandparents. But they eventually decided that they wanted to move to Miami. So we all, moved to Florida, moved to Miami. And at that time, I was preteen, about 12, 13 years old. So I continued to, I tried going to Catholic school, but it was not convenient transportation-wise, and there were other reasons. So I continued going to public school. My mother got a job at Barry University. And as it turned out, she ended up staying here for 23 years. She always worked in the president's office. She was like the executive administrative assistant to many presidents, from about 1960 something. She was the executive assistant to Sister Mary Alice Collins, Sister Dorothy Brown, Sister Trinita Flood, and then she left when Sister Jean O'Loughlin came. That was her 23 years, my mom, at Barry. And while she was here, while she was working with Sister Dorothy Brown, one of the presidents, Sister Dorothy insisted to her and had me come in her office many times that I come to Barry, I wanted to just go to work. I wanted to go out and get a job and work after I graduated from high school. So she insisted to my mom, and my mom, wanting to be loyal and faithful to her, said, at least come and try it. So I did. And at that time, Barry had a 2-year secretarial science program at the university. So I initially enrolled in that, and I completed the program. And during that time, I worked as a student aide for the only dean that Barry had at the time. That was Sister Arnold Benedetto. We didn't have a dean of every school because we didn't have many schools. She was the academic dean, and I was her student aide. And that's how I got to know the Adrian Dominicans, through her and the other sisters. I would, stay after. I would come on weekends. I would help her and get to know her and the other sisters. So that's how I came to Barry, and that's how I came to know the Adrian Dominican sisters.
So you're saying you were probably raised Catholic.
Oh, yes.
But
my mom was Catholic, but my dad was not.
Okay,
Yeah,
so not even, you're not half Catholic.
half Catholic, yeah.
Right.
But we.
But what you're saying is you were raised without any sort of sister of any kind of influence whatsoever. Public school your whole life, reluctantly came to Barry. And would you say that Sister Arnold is the reason that you became a nun?
Definitely. She's what we Adrians call our sponsor. She's the one who helped me along when it came time to really decide if this is what I wanted to do. She's the one who helped me and guided me, and yes, she's my sponsor. Yes.
When did you first then begin to realize that you, who wanted this job out of high school and was going to be a career gal, when did you decide, wait a minute, maybe there's another path for me? Maybe there's another career that I hadn't contemplated.
I decided that when I was a student here, and also working, with Sister Arnold and the other sisters. I worked with some of the other sisters too. That, what a wonderful group of people they were, and how joyful they were all the time. I always went to Sunday Mass, but I went to Mass more often. I got to, I wouldn't say I spoke to God, and I certainly wouldn't say I got any sign or anything like that, but our faith sort of tells us that God is always communicating with us one way or another. And I believe he was just communicating with me when I finally decided that I want to see if this is really what I want to do. That he was saying to me that, just be your best self, that's all we can do. So.
What was your parents' reaction?
They were shocked, especially my sisters. I'm the oldest of 4 children, and they couldn't believe it. My 2 next oldest sisters, they said, no way. Because they too didn't go to Catholic school either until we moved to Florida. Then they did actually go to. But none of us were really very close to a priest or sisters up in New York at all. So yeah, they were shocked. And
What do you recall here as a student? And certainly you came sort of, I guess, initially as a reluctant student at that, but what do you recall life was like as a student at Barry?
well, I was what they call a day student. I guess they called commuter students now. So I didn't get really the student life experience that you might get in a residence hall or dormitory. But in the classes that I took, I did make some very close friends, and a couple of us are still friends to this day. Those couple never did go to college, but other than this 2-year program at Barry. But, you know, life was good. Life was very strict for the students compared to how it is now. I mean, the way the students had to dress and the rules that they had to obey, particularly the resident students, the ones that lived on campus. And I don't know if you've ever seen some of the old yearbook pictures, you know, indicating how they had to dress and what kind of horarium they had to keep even as, you know, students, not
What was
future,
your
future
dress code?
sisters. Well, it was just, I guess you could say it was normal for the day. I don't know that the sisters that were the ones that were, I guess, responsible for keeping these codes had too much to say to us as commuter students, you know. Certainly we didn't wear slacks or anything like that, but it was skirts, dresses, yeah.
And did you stay? Did you get a 4-year degree from Barry?
No, I ended up entering after my 2 years here. You know, I was discerning that process while I was here, and after the 2-year program here is when I entered the Adrian sisters. And my sisters, my blood sisters, helped. In those days, we had to bring not only a dowry, as they call it, but we had to bring a lot of material things in a trunk, you know, the old black steamer trunk that you might see. We had to bring, they told us what to bring, like towels, blankets, and our garb, the postulants outfit, because when we first entered, we were called postulants, you know, and we wore this black outfit with a white collar, totally black, no veil. Yes, we did have like a light nylon type veil. And my sisters were much better seamstresses, and my mom too. So they actually made the outfits for me, and they never let me forget to this day, you know, as we'd sometimes dig up those pictures and they say, remember, I made that for you. So
So they're partly responsible.
they are.
When did you return to Barry?
Okay, so after the 2 years here, I entered, and the postulancy year is very strict. And then during the summer, I actually, well, during that postulancy year too, we're continuing our education, and we were doing that at Siena Heights College, which is on the grounds of the Mother House. So I continued that, and I pursued a degree in elementary education. So I continued to do that while I was a postulant and then as a novice. And in the summers, I came back to Barry, and I continued working in the academic dean's office, continued that relationship with the sisters now, and got to know them better. Let's see, when I didn't come back, of course, as a postulant, I'm sorry, I sort of got the years mixed up. I came back to Barry after the novitiate, you know, in the summers, because during that postulancy and novitiate, we weren't permitted to leave the grounds of Adrian. Our parents and families and friends could come and visit us, but so I came back after the novitiate to Barry to continue my education here from Siena, and I actually finished up and graduated from Barry with my degree in elementary education and a minor in business. So.
And what did you do with that degree? Where did you go? Where were you sent?
I was sent initially to Nassau in the Bahamas. We had a mission over there at that time, and I taught elementary education for about 3 years over there. It was wonderful. I loved it over there. And I was in full habit. That was, you know, it was very, but you sort of get used to it. You know how I was talking today to some people. Actually, a friend of mine is in Italy right now, and they have no air conditioning in most of the homes over there. So she's suffering through that, and I said, remember how we used to, you know, have no air conditioning here, I mentioned my mom worked here in the president's office, which was located in different spots on the campus, but one I remember was in the building that's called Adrian Hall, and the president's office was along that wing that leads toward the current registrar's office. They had those jalousie type slatted windows with fans built in the wall, no air conditioning, even in the president's office. So, you know, you get used to that. So we got used to the heat. So I was sent to the Bahamas. I loved it. Loved the beach. On the weekends, we often went to the beach in the Bahamas in full habit. You know, usually we were friendly with people who had a cabana or something to that effect. And, oh, we loved it. So then I got sent to St. Petersburg in Florida, and I taught in a Catholic elementary school there. Again, I taught middle school, and that just for a couple of years. And then I was resent back to the Bahamas for another 2 years, the same school, the same convent, everything, and taught there for another 2 years. And in the summers, from St. Petersburg and from the Bahamas is when I spent the most time at Barry working, because we were pretty free to go and expected to go to continue our education. So I did that, and I ended up pursuing an MBA degree, a master's in, because they didn't have that at the time when I first got my elementary education degree. Barry didn't have an MBA. So I did that during the summers and got my MBA from Barry. And I continued working, and actually I was working in the business. They called it business affairs, business and finance we call it now, and I started working there on a full-time basis, you know, in the business and finance office and I guess you could say, I forget what my title was, but it was like executive assistant to the business and finance person. And I did that for a few years, and then I was asked if I wanted to start what we then called the personnel department at the university here, because there was no such a thing. Everybody just did their own hiring, their own thing, so to speak. And so my supervisor, the vice president for business and finance, and I started the personnel department. And, I was primarily the one that was in the office doing all the work, setting up everything. We didn't have even computers at that time. So everything was done manually, the files, everything, and how I wanted to do it, because I had no precedent, to say to do it this way or that way or whatever. So that continued for a long time. And the role grew and the responsibilities with that grew as well. But along with personnel, I sort of wore many hats when I was doing that. I was also responsible for the university's telephone system, which had, some of these things have nothing at all to do with personnel, but anyway, we were still, fairly big enterprise here, so I was in charge of the phone system, which included, taking anybody's telephone orders, if they had new faculty coming, new whatever. And I always walked around with a screwdriver in my pocket, because that also included the repair of the phones, calling in all the repair orders.
Oh, you had to repair
Yes,
them?
I had no assistant at that time. I started out, this was a one-person show, so to speak, in personnel. So, yes, so I always walked around, because a lot of times people called in repairs, and it was, believe it or not, professors, for silly things like the jack wasn't plugged in the wall, or the jack was loose from the wall, or whatever. So I always had a screwdriver. And I remember this one funny story. It was after a few years of running the personnel, getting it set up, and also handling the phone system. We were going to get a brand new, I guess you could say it was a computerized phone system, a whole new, totally new phone system that, had a lot of features, not just answer the phone. So I pulled this prank on the whole university. everybody knew we were getting a new system. People were not happy. They went to training. We saw films on how it's going to be, and people were getting, nervous about how this is going to work and how this is going to be a little change in their life. So I sent out, we had computers at that time, and I sent out an email to the whole campus, and I said, on such and such a day, everybody is expected to get a brown bag, a brown paper bag, a small brown paper bag, and put it over the receiver on your phone. Because the phone company, which at the time was Southern Bell, is going to be blowing out the dust from all the lines in preparation for getting this new phone system on campus. Well, that was the funniest thing. You can't believe how many people actually did it. At 3 o'clock on this certain given day, people came to work prepared with their brown paper bag, and nothing happened. So that was funny.
Did you get in any trouble for your little prank?
No.
Could you do that today, do you think?
Yeah, I probably could. Nobody would believe it these days. It would have to be pretty much more wild than that. But that was fun. So the phones and the personnel was growing. I did get a secretary at this point, and so that was good. And then I also got the added responsibility of being in charge of renting all the university space. People who wanted to have a wedding reception. In the summers, we were big into dance recitals and using our auditorium for dance recitals. And whatever facilities could be used, that people found out that we had them, they wanted to rent them. So that involved... It's my phone.
Here, stop.
We'll just wait for it.
Oh, okay. That's all right. But she'll want to turn it off.
Yeah.
In case
Do you want to turn it off?
Yeah.
well, she should, because it could ring again. Careful, don't forget your mic.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Thank you.
you can carry this with you. Who was that?
It's very.
Okay.
Like he's gonna help me cut him.
No.
I just asked him to. I'll do this.
Okay.
So where was this?
I was on the floor just through
Yeah.
there, just anywhere convenient out of the way.
Oops.
That's fine. That's fine. You'd be
And I'm just going to
surprised.
fix the cord a little bit here so it's hidden behind your jacket.
You would be surprised how many people walk away with that. And
Yeah.
I just almost did.
Yeah. See, that way,
it's pretty durable.
see this way, we don't see the black cord.
Better.
Okay, so now
where
you've
was
got let me see, we're catching up. You've got a secretary, and you were renting out the facilities, especially during the summer.
Right, so the rental of the facilities also included designing contracts for same, because everything was informal with these responsibilities that, I was given. Nothing was in place to look at. Getting insurance, from the people that were renting the facilities, setting up the guidelines for them so that they knew and we knew. And some of them got to be pretty wild, so we had to be a little bit more stringent on the guidelines as to what they could and couldn't do when they were here as our guests. So that was interesting. Okay, so personnel grew and grew and grew, and my department grew a lot more. I think the most people I ever had in the department was 4. And there's now about 14 in human resources, but as you know, human resources is very much more legalistic and, just in every way, it's just grown tremendously. So I always had a very good staff, and we got the department going and developed handbooks and guidelines and worked with benefits for all the employees. We always have been, I think, known to have an excellent benefits program for our employees, even to this day. So.
You mentioned your mother worked here, but your sister also worked here too, didn't she?
She may have worked here for part of one semester.
So
But,
Myra, she worked in the administration in student affairs?
That's in the future, yes.
I've jumped ahead. You
Yeah,
mean- I'm sorry.
yeah, I'm sorry. My sister Janet, she worked for about 7 years as an executive assistant in the Vice President for Student Affairs office, and just retired about 3 years ago. Okay, so this was very most recent that she worked here. And she loved it too, but the only reason she left is she lived in Fort Lauderdale and just couldn't take the I-95 hassle anymore. So she didn't really need to work, so that's the only reason she left, or she probably still would be here. I was thinking you meant in those early days that she worked here. No.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I thought, so what did you do then, are you still, but you're not in personnel now?
No, I
or
stayed in
human
personnel, which of course changed everywhere to human resources until 8 years ago. I left human resources and I moved to our School of Podiatric Medicine, where I've been for the last 8 years. And what I do over there is podiatric medicine is a doctoral program, 4-year program, and I work with the junior and senior students in that program as they're doing their rotations in hospitals throughout the country, especially the seniors who have to do month-long rotations at a different hospital, almost all during their whole senior year. They go for a month here, a month there. So I work with, there's actually a national directory of hospitals that have established externship or clerkship, as they're called, programs for students of podiatric medicine. There are only 9 schools of podiatry in the whole country, and Barry's one of them. So this directory of, possible podiatric externships is, one that's used by all the students in all the 9 schools. But part of the process of getting the students in these externships, they choose where they want to go. We have to have, the paperwork connected with that is very extensive. We have to have what are called affiliation agreements between us and the hospital before a student can go to these hospitals. And then it's a very expensive procedure for the student, to be able to go to go all over the country to a hospital here, there, or everywhere. And some students can't really afford to do that, so they might choose to go to 2 or 3 wherever they're from, or stay in Miami. We try to encourage them to get a broader experience and go all over, knowing that from the first they come here, it's going to be expensive when they're a senior to do these externships. So that's what I do, and that's what our students are doing right now as we speak. They're the seniors are in the midst of these externships, and then the whole goal of the podiatry student is to be able to get a residency when they finish their 4-year program here at the school. And there currently is a shortage of podiatric residencies in the United States. So last year we had about 12 students that didn't get a residency. So what happens to them is that they have to compete with the class under them the next year and go through the process again, because it's a process where the student has to go to be interviewed, almost like getting a job at the hospitals. They have to take boards, boards part 1, boards part 2, and then clinical boards before they are even eligible to go for interviews. So that's another reason why the students go on these externships, to familiarize themselves with the hospitals, to see, is this where I want to do my residency? Because like the MD, the DPMs, Doctors of Podiatric Medicine, have the same education, literally, that an MD has, and they have to do a 3-year residency when they graduate. So if there's a shortage, it makes it really difficult. They can't get a license in any way until they get this residency, under their belt. There's no way around that currently. So they have to do well during these externships. They get evaluated, and they love it. They love the clinical experience, which they get a little start in doing in their junior year. They go on local rotations to hospitals around the Miami, Fort Lauderdale, West Palm area for some of that rotation experience. And then they're getting familiar by phone calls, by coming in my office, by talking to upperclassmen about other hospitals and which have good programs and where they want to do their externships when they're a senior. So that's what I'm doing now in podiatry.
Let me shift gears a little bit, but so you have seen Barry over a large swath of years. You've seen it go make many, many changes. How would you describe those changes? What did you see? Do you like the changes? Do you not like the changes? Do you like some changes? Do you have reservations? But how has Barry changed, and what do you think of these changes?
As you indicated, Barry has changed dramatically during this time. Some of the changes are good and some are not so good. You know, I would say probably one of the hardest changes is the growth of the university, and can we keep up with that, and the growth of other schools in the area causing this competition for us to be able to continue to be the #1 school in certain particular areas, like I indicated before, nursing and education especially. Some of the changes have been difficult. Some of them have been caused by this competition, the changes, the financial changes, the having to lay off people, which we never had to do before. It's not to say we didn't have competition before, but we just never had to do that before. Yeah.
What about the changes, let's say in the student population? It's a much more diverse body than it ever was. What do you think of that?
I think that's a good thing. Yes, we're very, very diverse, you know. I notice that especially every year when I get the rosters, even for podiatry, which are, you know, tend to be much older students than your 18 to 21-year-old. They're from all over the world, you know. As far as the rest of Barry, the typical undergraduate population, yes, you see a lot of diversity. And Barry's won some awards for being one of the schools with a lot of diversity among the student population.
Is that good, or does that cause friction?
I think it's a good thing. I think it's a good thing, particularly in this South Florida climate. That's what you see all around you is diversity. You know, you're not going to see the kind of student that we had when we first opened the doors. The students were all white American girls, you know. Barry became co-ed, which is a very good thing. But the ethnic diversity of Miami has changed, so we have to change along with that.
You have no doubt noticed, and part of this is the recognition that less women are choosing a vowed life than they did 20, 30, 40 years ago. Their Sister Linda Bevilacqua, for example, might be the last, for some time, for a time, or it might be the last sister in charge of Barry University. Sister Peg was the first, I think, sister there they'd had at Siena Heights was there, you know, I think it'd been 20 years, it was more of a lay. What do you think about the future of Catholic universities in general, if with a lack of the presence of Adrian Dominican sisters?
I think we're experiencing the lack of the presence of sisters already. So, you know, Catholic education, in my opinion, is going to continue with or without the sisters. As you know, when I was in the Bahamas, one of the things we did after school, so to speak, was to train the women in the parish how to teach, so that they could take over, because there were a lot of sisters at the time who were teaching in the Catholic schools over there, but we needed more teachers. So there were a lot of women who were willing to teach, but they needed to be trained. So just like, I wouldn't say that the sisters today, the few of us that are left here, are training people how to teach, but maybe they're getting the idea that this school can still continue without the presence of sisters on the campus. So
do you think that something will be lacking, something will be missing without a strong presence of sisters on this campus or campuses?
Yes, there will be something missing, but the chapel on this campus has always been the heart of the campus, and I'm sure that that's going to continue. We mentioned a while ago that the student population is very diverse. That includes amongst in their religions as well. Our chapel is always and has always been open to these students of any religious and ethnic background. So I think that the fact that this is a Catholic school, I think, is going to continue. And that's going to be our prime focus. But I think that we're going to be open to, and continue to be open to, other religions as well.